We had the Roman Empire, the Spanish Empire, the British Empire, and now we live in the age of the American Empire. No other country has had such a military presence in so many places. Even in remote places like Guam in the middle of the Pacific, America has a military base, and that's actually pretty useful. The fact that you can buy a mobile phone made in South Korea with just one click, that's the outcome of global capitalism. But also, global capitalism would not be possible if trade wasn't safe. Those American bases, they're there to protect those ships that move goods from one place to another. And this is really the reason why the US invests so much in having a strong army, which has kind of been unchallenged until now. So now you might be wondering, or you might not be, who is challenging this empire, because of course it's China. And, well, how is China doing it? Well, that's what we're going to see in this video. This is the million-dollar question. Why does America have such a big army? You might argue that it doesn't really need one. In fact, just by looking at a map, you can see that America has a big advantage. It's secured by two fairly sizable oceans, making it almost impossible to attack or invade. Nonetheless, America has the biggest army on the planet. It has more than 1 million active military personnel and almost 800 military bases located in 70 different countries, territories all over the globe. Britain, France, and Russia, by contrast, have about 30 foreign bases combined. Just have a look at this map. America is all over the place, and there is no country that can challenge them. Well, hold on a second, because maybe there is. Yes, dear viewers, today we're talking all about China. Here on VisualPolitik, we've talked thousands of times about China's economic progress. It's the world's factory, and many Chinese companies are starting to become big competition for the technological behemoths. But now we're talking about their military. More specifically, their military presence in the South China Sea. And believe me, this is no joke.
China's South China Sea play. The end of Beijing's peaceful rise?
The definition string of pearls was first used in 2005 in an international report given by the Department of Defense of the United States. In this report, it was predicted that China will try to expand its naval presence throughout the Indian Ocean region. In this context, the pearls are a metaphor for each of the military bases that China wants to build, making a string that goes all the way down to Africa and the Middle East, where China imports most of its natural resources. And as you can imagine, these military expansions, they scared the whole world, especially America. And it got even more scary when the former Chinese president Hu Jintao said this in 2009.
The road of peaceful development is a strategic choice made by the Chinese government and people in the line of the nation's peace-loving traditional culture, the trend of our times, and the fundamental interests of China. Hu Jintao.
Yeah, so for some reason, this quote that was intended to chill out the Americans basically had the opposite effect. It pretty much sounded like China was saying the opposite of what is actually the truth. But okay, I know what you're probably thinking right now. I mean, so what? What's the problem with China trying to increase their military? After all, it's just another country, everyone has an army and wants to be safe. Right? I mean, why should we care about China having military bases? Do they really want to surpass the United States? Can they even? Well, today we're going to answer all of those questions, but before we do, as we always do, let's take a look back at the history.
Lessons from the pain.
Yeah, we said America is almost impossible to invade. But there was an exception, and that was in the year 1941 when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. A year later, the Japanese invaded the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. That was the moment when America learned an important lesson. Nobody is 100% safe. It was also the time that they figured they should probably care about protecting the oceans. In fact, during World War II, the US had to fight among lots of small islands in the Pacific. This was the case during the Battle of Midway. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese tried to eliminate the US as a strategic power in the Pacific, and they hoped to succeed by demoralizing the American forces with another surprise attack. American cryptographers, though, they managed to decipher the date and the location of Japan's attack and prepared a surprise counterattack. Needless to say, the US inflicted irreparable damage to the Japanese fleet. World War II ended, the Americans won, and they remembered their lesson. We can't let this happen again. So, well, what did they do? Well, they covered the Pacific Ocean with military bases. Basically, they kept soldiers on those small islands where they had fought. And now you might be wondering, well, why is it so important to have soldiers on a small island that no one really cares about? I mean, is it really that bad if someone wants to invade an atoll like Midway? I mean, really? And also, moving soldiers to the other side of the planet and keeping them there, it's not exactly cheap.
A warship is basically a floating city with big guns on it. And it's a city that can travel 500 to 1,000 kilometers in one day. So moving one of those from Los Angeles to Shanghai would take more than 10 days. But if you already have ships and soldiers in Guam, you can be to Shanghai in almost 3 days. This is designed to deter potential conflicts.
In fact, most of those ships would never have to fire a single weapon. Being so powerful, honestly, no one would probably dare to attack them. But not only that, many of these ships are not meant to combat other armies, but rather they're meant to combat pirates. For example, the USS Independence is a warship created for the main purpose of combating piracy. And this is just one of many ships. In fact, the USS Naval Force is getting bigger and bigger all the time. And this means that so far, no one has been able to match it.
US Navy to add 46 ships in 5 years, but 355 ships won't come for a long time.
Of course, this gives America a huge amount of power, and this can be worrying to some people. But so far, it's created a safe environment where everybody can trade untroubled. Whenever some country or some pirates want to block a trade route, they have to face all those American ships. This is one reason why Southeast Asian nations have become exporting powerhouses. And of course, it's benefited China too. The truth is that there are many countries that would happily block China's trade routes. But is China comfortable in this position? Does it like depending so much on America's army? Well, let's have a look.
A new hegemon.
So, what defines a territory? Well, a territory is an area of land under the jurisdiction of a ruler or a state. Not all territories are born equal. Some have abundant natural resources like gems, gas, and oil, while others basically have no resources. The availability of some resources gives the country they belong to some pretty big advantages in trade. The most obvious example of this is oil and how much its trade has defined Saudi Arabia's economy. What about the others, those who have little or few resources? They need to import everything for their industries. They must compete with international bidders to secure stable supplies of resources, which basically means their industrial cost of production is also going to be higher. And this steer viewer is essentially China's situation. Yes, China's got a lot of industry, but almost no resources. Oil, steel, uranium, most of the things it needs to make those mobile phones, cars, or TVs, it's got to come from other parts of the world. And this appetite for raw materials is increasing every single day, but this still isn't the end of our story. Once those resources are required, China needs to transport them to its territory safely and for as little money as possible. The South China Sea is the busiest collection of shipping lanes in the world. It's the lifeblood of East Asia, carrying most of its trade in oil. It's obvious then that China would very much like to keep these lines of trade open and preferably to control them. China also doesn't have a big consumer market like the US does, so it wants to export a lot of what it makes in order to make money, and these routes can be blocked at any time by one of their neighboring countries, which would stop all of that from happening. The Communist Party, the governing force in China, also has a lot of mouths to feed, so control over this region is essential if the party wants to stay in power. Alright, so I can probably guess what you're thinking right now. You're probably thinking, well, China isn't the only one. Many other countries have no natural resources either, and they don't complain. Of course, but there is a big problem here. Being so dependent on imports and exports, China only needs one country to block its routes to collapse it in a matter of months. And as we mentioned before, there are many countries who would very happily do that, especially one in particular, and that's India.
You see this string of islands on the Indian Ocean? Well, these belong to India. And the Indian army could block Chinese boats there. And this would mean that China couldn't buy most of the oil that they currently consume. Most of the oil tankers that go from the Middle East to China pass through the Strait of Malacca, right where Singapore is. We're talking about almost 20 million barrels of oil a day and many other goods in addition.
But if India blocked the routes among those small islands, good luck trying to get that oil. In fact, there is such an existential threat to China that their former president Hu Jintao used to call this the Malacca Dilemma. And we're not just talking about India. In fact, America isn't going through their best time when it comes to loving the Chinese either. And again, the American Navy, it has the capability to block the oil supply to China by sea. This would be far more devastating than any trade war. So, well, what's the solution?
The Belt and Road Initiative and its maritime counterpart, the String of Pearls.
The Belt and Road Initiative was initiated by President Xi Jinping in 2013 with the aim of rebuilding infrastructure and accelerating Chinese economic growth. Essentially, this is a brand new Silk Road, and the String of Pearls, well, that's its maritime brother. In 2017, Mr. Xi pledged an additional $124 billion towards his $900 billion Belt and Road Initiative. China is promoting this global trade infrastructure as a long-term win-win campaign for the 65 nations that have signed up to it. Most Western leaders, however, they stayed away from the Chinese summit announcing the ambitious project. But the 28 heads of state present at what Mr. Xi called a gathering of great minds included President Putin of Russia and President Erdogan of Turkey.
This is indeed a gathering of great minds. In the coming 2 days, I hope that by engaging in a full exchange of views, we will contribute to pursuing the Belt and Road Initiative, a project of the century, so that it will benefit people across the world. Xi Jinping.
With China consolidating its power and relationships with countries all over the South China Sea region, it might become really difficult for the United States to keep being the big boss in charge of the region. If China was to surpass the US, the United States would lose all of its deterrence power in this key region of the globe. And this would completely change the rules of international trade. Americans, well, they're pretty worried about this, and earlier this year, the CIA went so far as to state that the US has two major problems right now: Russia and China, and their effort to undermine the US's influence in key regions like Africa and the South China Sea.
We are not naive, and we are taking significant steps on the counterintelligence side so that we have all the defenses that we need. U.S. Africa Command's General Thomas Waldhauser.
Alright, so I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking America, it's an empire all over the world, and we're just talking about one small region, the South China Sea. And yeah, that's absolutely right. In fact, China is only threatening US dominance in the South China Sea, not the whole world. But this region, it really is the most important when it comes to international trade, and this is why the struggle is quite so intense. But the show, it still goes on. In fact, China knows that if it goes too far with building military bases, the US will call on its allies in the region to do the same. This would mean scaling up military spending. And look, China and the US, they might not be the best couple on the planet, but they kind of tolerate each other. And also, the US's allies in the region, well, they really do have a problem with China. We've got India, which we mentioned previously, there's also Japan, among others. And China does not want those guys to increase their military presence. This is why, so far, China is playing a very patient game. It's a very long-term challenge, and long-term in Chinese, that means really long-term. We might be talking about decades here. But despite the slow path, you'd better remember the term string of pearls, because it's going to appear a lot more in the newspapers. This is going to be so important that at the beginning of next year on VisualPolitik, we're going to continue telling you more about it in another series of videos that we've got coming up. So if you don't want to miss those, please do not forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell button so you won't miss any posts. But now the question is, do you think that the string of pearls is really such a threat to international stability? Where does the US go from here? Is this the beginning of the end for the American empire? Well, please leave your answer in the comment section below, and of course don't forget to visit our friends from reconsidermedia.com. They're the podcast that provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. Also, if you like this video, give it a like, and as always, I'll see you next time.
And if you want to learn more about politics and hear even more of my lovely voice, you can join us at Reconsider Media. We have a podcast at reconsidermedia.com/podcast. See you there.